You're listening to The Lowdown, a podcast inspired by the creative people in the bass making community. I'm Frankie. I'll be sitting down with bass makers to explore what drives them creatively and to find out what challenges they face in the business of bass. Let's find out what it's all about. Let's get The Lowdown. All right, cool. Hey, welcome to The Lowdown, sponsored by Best Bass Gear. Hey, we're doing it. Here we go. And we have Eric, and we have Ed Garnero of Garnero Guitars from Tempe, Arizona. And Ed has a really interesting day job we're going to get into a little bit later too. Not that making basses isn't his day job. I'm sure that could be. He has two interesting day jobs. We'll say that. But anyway, Ed, welcome to The Lowdown. It's great to actually see you because I've spoken with you on the phone and in emails many times. It's just nice to do this,
And sure. I'm super stoked to be talking with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
Yeah.
So you're in Arizona, right?
Yep.
And so what time is it in Arizona right now?
It's at the Krakatoa. It's 5 a.m. and yeah, nice, bright and bushy tail. Feels good.
5 a.m. somewhere.
Yeah, it's 5 a.m. somewhere right here.
Yeah. Well, we were just talking about that, right? It just how there's something about early mornings, late nights, that you just get some of your best thinking and creativity, out of you, and that's why we like doing these like this. So
it actually feels very bass player, right? Because as a bassist, often we're in a band supporting, and we're in this role that is kind of independent of the flash. It can be the flash, so it's being a bass player is so 5 a.m.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, for sure it is. Yeah. That being said, I mean, I always wonder this especially when I meet other bass players or any instrumentalists, really. I mean, what got you to gravitate towards bass? I mean, how did that happen? So I have to think about that myself sometimes too. Like, wow, why did I pick this? And it's interesting. I always like to hear what people's answers are.
It's fun, and it's there's gravitating towards the bass as a player, and then there's gravitating towards like, I should make these. And the first was, it's just dumb luck. There was a child prodigy guitarist down the street, and we met each other when we were 6, and this was like when it's very different from today. It's like as soon as you're able to walk, the front door of the house was open and you're cruising the neighborhood, right?
Yeah, totally.
Without your parents.
Different times, yeah.
And so I met this kid when we were 6, and we became best buddies. He played guitar, and his brother was a bassist in a band, and he was like, some kind of messiah. We're like, Joe's in a band, and they played in the garage, and they played out, and they played around California and stuff where I grew up. And so Billy, his brother, who's now, he's one of the most amazing guitarists that I've ever worked with, actually. He was like, you should play bass. Here, you take this acoustic guitar that only has 2 strings left on it. And we learned on those 2 strings, I learned like Johnny Be Good, Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo, and the song we wrote named after our street, Euclid. So it was Euclid Jam. So he did that like for 2 years, and he's like, you should buy a bass. And so that was when the Montgomery Ward chain of department stores was open, and I bought this like with lawn mowing money, and my parents paid for half of this $99 bass. That's a lot of money in 1974. I was 14, and so it was an EB2 Gibson copy, right? But anyway, so I bought a bass, and we'd plug in it, we like Mickey Moused it into the stereo. So Billy Valera was the reason I played bass. It was perfect for me as a person who wanted to kind of be in the background but have a lot of fun, and who just loved kind of this concept of foundation and being able to flavor the foundation the way bass can. And then later in life, learning that, wow, with bass, you could get attention for the 6 or 7 kids in a big family, which isn't necessarily a musically driven thing. But that's what drove me to bass, was just like dumb luck meeting this guy. and music turned out to be like such a perfect thing for me to you know, just learn about life and myself and stuff like that.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I think there's a certain I don't know if it's mentality but there's something that drives somebody to play the bass because it is such a supportive thing which is why I think there's a lot of producers that are bass players because
Yeah,
you're very much taking in the big picture,
Yeah.
without taking up the limelight, so necessarily, so you're very conscious about what you're playing, but you're also very conscious about what everybody else is playing. So like when you do have a chance to play something you might think of as an embellishment or whatever, you're really waiting for your spot. That's how I kind of think of it. It's
yeah,
just interesting that way.
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And it was kind of a home for me, you know, because I played in bands for probably since like when I was 17. I got into a band with senior year in high school, 5 nights a week in a bar where they made me sit on the stage on the breaks, you know, because it wasn't legal to really be in the club. Up through like finishing my undergraduate degree, music was my source of income, and
Wow.
it was kind of a home, you know. It was really
Yeah,
special.
very much. That's great. I mean, at what point did you think it'd be cool to make these things?
You know, it was when I was here in Arizona, and it was probably the better part of 15 years ago. I was playing in a band with another professor, uh, and I wanted to get this P bass, which I had a guy in Santa Cruz like level it because I got it from a friend who pulled the frets, you know, this Jocko era. Oh my God, I got to pull the frets on this thing, and epoxy and sawdust. Okay, boom.
That's
And
what you had to
but
do.
you had to do it. And it, and so I ended up permanently borrowing this like 1981 P bass, nice bass, but I wanted the neck planed, and so this guy did it. And then I played it really aggressively with round wounds, and so I needed to have it planed again. And Robbie Robertson, not Robertson, but Robertson, the Tempe Robbie Robertson, he was like, I go to this guy at that guitar school, whatever that is, John Reuter. You should go check him out. So he's a head instructor at Roberto Venn School of Luthery,
Yeah, yeah.
and so I didn't know anything about Roberto Venner, and so I brought it to him, and then another time I brought him one of my Sadowskis to. Does this need a fret job? You know, I don't know. He's like, and John is awesome. He's like, is it bothering you? I'm like, no, but I had a picture of it online on social media without the strings, changing the strings, and one of my Italian luthier social media friends is like, oh wow, you've really dug into that. Looks like it needs a fret job. And John's like, are you happy with it? I'm like, yeah, then it doesn't need a fret job. And so I brought a couple things into John, and he was either getting sick of me or just doing what he does as a teacher. He's like, why don't you do this stuff? But
Yeah.
buy this book here. Here he has this box of the Stu Mac Dan Erlewine books. It's like, here. And they're signed. And I was like, oh, yeah, whatever. Okay. So I started reading this book. And this is just for the repairs, right? But then I was like, wow, you know, and then learning about the school, I was like, those guys are doing from scratch acoustic guitars.
Yeah.
Mind blown.
Yeah.
So Ed, John, I don't know if he knows this or not, but and then I ended up interacting with him a bit through bands because we played the same bill. I had this funk band and he had this Grateful Dead cover band, and just talking and seeing the stuff he made, and I was like, okay. So I started Frankensteining basses, and so I Frankenstein for like, and I built a Warmoth bass, but so I started Frankenstein stuff, and so that's kind of what I did for 5 years, Frankensteining and selling. Yeah, like these axes are all Frankensteined in some way. That middle one with the pearloid inlays, that's the Warmoth axe. And and learning about inlays and decals and one thing at a time. And I was never brave enough to do anything with the wood. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. So then I started building the bodies because the neck was like, oh my God, who in their right mind would ever try to build a neck? That just seems
it,
impossible.
it, it,
Yeah.
it does seem insurmountable, right? When you before you know. I mean, it's just like wow, that just seems like way too complicated.
Yeah,
Uh,
totally. And similar, just everything along the way, electronics, just always seems until you know. Like I remember the first time from you guys that I built a from scratch bass. It's that 6 string back there, which
yeah,
is kind of a tribute to my mom passing. And I gig with that one a fair bit. I love it. I remember with the electronics, I was like, oh, I totally want to just do a magnetic pickup. And I was smitten on trying this hip shot with piezos in it. It's
yeah.
like, that's bass gear has all that stuff. I'm like, how to wire? And you guys, well, yeah, you need this buffer for the piezo to the magnetic. And I remember doing it all in Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, and working with, it might have been Max who like helped me figure it out.
Yeah.
But then once it was figured out, I'm like, that's you just, and it's, you guys pre-wire, right? So you
Yeah.
almost can't go wrong. Yeah, sure you can go wrong,
Yeah.
but it was, you guys kind of like gave me the mojo for the electronics, even though I kind of consider myself, uh, like a little bit stunted on that end. But it's just another how-to. You do it a few times and you're like, that's no big deal. Just follow the recipe.
That's what it is, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's just like anything else, any other craft, any other thing that you learn. It's just getting into it and getting some confidence around it, and then diving in, and then you start working around the edges, and exploring, different things. I think we have, there's lots of folks out there that on the electronic side, they're just, um, nope. Like I can't do that. I can't do that. But then, they get, you get on the phone with them, you talk them through it a little bit, and they get, pretty comfortable with the idea that you've got somebody like standing there behind you, kind of watching, or, they go down the street and they talk to a buddy, and they've done it, and they just watch it in the garage a couple of times. And, before you know it, they're doing it themselves. So I think it's easier than people think it is. But yeah, it's definitely good to have somebody, to be able to rely on and get some advice
Yeah,
from, for sure.
Oh, without
absolutely.
question. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No,
I mean, I would say to me, it's almost like if you could. I think the hardest thing, at least I found for folks, is just having a soldering iron is the right temperature, and just getting everything hot enough to make a proper solder joint. And you can always, I know for me, I can always tell right away when I'm looking at pictures of things that people are sending me when things aren't working, like when things were just gray and craggy, and like, well, hey, maybe or maybe not. There might be something going on there. But it can sort of, at first, even if you don't know anything about electronics, it's kind of like, if you guys remember paint by numbers. I mean, if they still make paint by numbers, I mean, that's how old I
Right.
am. But it's like very much, it's just like, hey, this wire goes here, that goes there. Eventually, as you, if you want to get a bit more into it, I mean, gosh, I mean, it becomes like plumbing to a degree after that. Once you know where your ins and your outs are, and your pots are like valves, I kind of think of it like that.
Yep.
So to me, it's just kind of how it works.
it's true. I was thinking about this in response to being invited to talk with you guys. And there's always something that is one step beyond my wheelhouse. Well, there's a billion things beyond my wheelhouse,
Oh,
but there's that thing I want to do that
Mm.
I haven't done. Like I haven't yet made a jig for block inlays, on the neck, and or thought about the best way to do it since I don't have a CNC, but I'm not scared of routers or Dremel or jig making, but I haven't done that yet. And so I'm a little intimidated about, like, yeah, on a maple neck, you see every little mistake. You could hide stuff on the darker woods. And so
yeah,
there's 50 things like that. But then when you do it and you maybe biff it a little bit first time, and then you get good at it, and then it's like I'll never screw up on side dot inlays anymore because of my side dot plexiglass jig, you know, that were for a 34-inch scale. If you clamp it right, your dots are right. And
That's right.
so that's kind of fun. Like one thing that's always intimidated me is preamps or pickups, right? Like
Yeah.
when I go to your webpage and I look at pickups, and now I'm starting to build in batch, which is fun. And I could turn on my phone and walk you to the garage and show you stuff if you want, but
Sure.
it's like, oh my gosh, pickups and preamps. You know, I love high-end gear. I love to be able to, you know, one of my bass making goals is tonal versatility. So like if you want to sound like you know, Sly and Robbie and Peter Tosh's band, can you get that out of a high-end bass? That's not so easy, right? Or if you want to sound like Marcus Miller, can you get that out of these pickups and preamp? Notching those mids is not like trivial in the frequency to get that pop without the mid-range clank or clack. And so those kinds of things, like can you make a spectrally super versatile preamp? And then how does the pickups are important for that? And there's so many, like even EMGs, which I was doing soap bars because it's an easy format with a template to make and route the holes and everything for that, you know, 1.5 by 4. And I have this Sadowski 5-string fretless that I just like adore, and it had EMGs. And I was like, EMGs are, that was from '95. I was like, those aren't like boutique. And now with the Nordstrand and all of these, there's so many boutique pickup maker vendors, right? I'm like, how do I know? Like, what if I'm working with a guy who's like, what do you want? I'm like, I don't even know. So that's something I'm excited, like over the next 5 years, to just start trying different things to learn. And I can't like bug you guys. Can you guys talk to me another hour this week again about your pickup ideas? I mean, I know if I called, you would be there, but.
Well, the answer is we can, but we would never get anything done.
Right. Your descriptions are awesome. You know, some of the pickups are better described than others. Like, but even the EMG, you got the DC, the DCX, blah blah, and the blah blah blah. And I just grabbed one, like, oh, I forget who it was. They said try the DCX, and so I married that to Aguilar in this fretless 5 I recently made and sold, and it's like, that sounds good. But like everything sounds good if it's high end. So like even the preamps, I'm super lucky with my work, and we could talk about this if you're interested, but like I work with a lot of guys who are like rocket scientists, you know, they're astrophysicists, they're engineers.
Literally, yeah.
Literally. And many of them are building their own gear that goes to space, like circuitry, circuit boards, CCDs, you name it. And one of the guys is an audiophile. This guy, Chris Groppe, he's one of our professors. He does things, goes to Antarctica, sends up telescopes on balloons that go up in the something sphere, troposphere, I don't know, 100 kilometers up, looks at stars, stabilizers. And he's an audiophile, and he actually writes columns for audio magazines. I was like, Chris, I have a proposition about making a bass preamp, you know? And he's like, okay, so what? It's so engineering. It's like, so what are your needs that aren't being met by the existing stuff in the market? I'm like, he got me. But I do have some ideas about that, right? Like it's almost like that thing, like that next thing. I can't make a neck. Yeah. Only people who actually know what they're doing make necks of guitars and basses. And until you do it, you're like, So the same thing with these preamps. I'm like, oh my gosh, as a day gig, as a seismologist, I could totally do all the spectral analysis of isolated basses on tracks of my own basses with and without preamps. Like, you know, Roger says he's at like, you know, whatever is it, 18 dB or 40 hertz plus or minus X dB for the bass and his treble, and he doesn't have a mid-range. Well, I could check that out and see like how dialed in, how broad is the peak, you know. and how's that compared to bass mods or Aguilar or whatever, to see, and then how do those marry with the instruments I'm making that have their own natural resonant frequencies. So I see that kind of like over the next 5 years to get more responsible about that stuff, because that's kind of my day gig, my other day gig.
So talk to us about your day gig, right? I mean, you mentioned it earlier. You're a seismologist at Arizona State, correct?
That's right.
Yes, and
Arizona State University.
They're in Tempe. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have degrees in geophysics from Berkeley and Caltech, and then I postdoc for a while, and then I got a faculty professor gig at ASU in '99. So, God, it sounds so long ago. And so I research and teach, and I have a group, and I mentor students getting their PhDs. And I'm a geophysicist, though seismology is a breed of geophysics. And like, I think like many guys with day gigs, men and women players who their heart is in music, but you got this day gig because you got to put food on the table.
Yep.
Whether it's I wasn't brave enough to stay with music full time and I wanted to do the science thing, or I wanted to do the science thing and then there's this music thing that I love to do on the side, or myriad flavors in between, that about when I was in my 30s, I was like, oh my God, it's the same me. Why am I like thinking there's this versus that? And I used to battle them. And then I realized it was the same me. And so I get this professor gig. And I was like, wait a minute, I could still be Ed the musician professor. And so anyway, I got this professor gig, and it started to occur to me that, and you might think I'm exceptionally stunted for not having this thought until 10, 15 years after being a faculty in a science program at a university, that seismology is a science of vibrations. Bass playing is a vibration. This string, here's that P bass in question, this is like, that's a and the big fat epoxy lines, that's a vibration. And the concept of resonance is like pretty important in seismology. You have like, 8-point something earthquake, and it rattles these jello-like sediments under Mexico City in '85. And after a while, the buildings just like start getting loose, aligned with it, and fall down. So just like I could sing a note in here and some guitar on the wall is going to resonate. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. So my day gig is something I love. I'm like, I kind of view it as being paid to be curious. It has dominated me in the pre-tenure, 7 years, going up to getting tenure to become and then eventually a full professor, like where that's all you do. And then to realize that I'm operating without all my limbs to bring the music side back into it. So I like to play bass in the 200 student intro to geology class, and bring in dancers. One of our professors was a professional touring ballerina in a troupe, and we'll do stuff for like the birth of the solar system. We have like full 3D theater, kind of like a IMAX thing, but it's 3D and it's amazing 3D. And she'll freestyle dance to me like looping stuff, and just we'll do a theater thing, and the students are kind of like, what the hell, who are these people? Is that my professor? Are you a scientist? What are you? So it's really fun to like shed that. And now I'm working with some of the people in the theater department on like I have this concept, and we did one, it was called Beneath, of like a new kind of documentary, because all these, like, not to get political, but like climate change isn't real, and the scientists are charlatans and paid to like democratic agenda, which is all total BS. We're scientists, you can't publish we have to pay to publish papers, right? Through research grants that you have to get funded that are reviewed by other scientists. Or it's like beating you up because they want to get funded and there's only a tiny pot of money. It's not easy to publish your work.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, how do you reach people? Like, you reach people through the heart. So what would it be to have like a TED Talk, the pithy narrative of a TED Talk merged with the light, sound, motion of Cirque du Soleil for like a documentary where people aren't sure what they just experienced? Was that a documentary, or was that a play, or was that art? So I'm super keen on working with working with engineers and light and sound and media artists to like, that's kind of, I would drop my day gig to do that if I could like still feed my kids.
Right. I think that's the fascinating thing to me is I think you're dead on where you're saying, there's a large number of people who, just sort of like view education, and professors. I mean, I like when I went to school, that was my thing, right? Is like, they're not real. They're just sort of the people that are standing up there. And what you're actually doing is sort of taking that mask off and you're saying, this is me. It's all of me. Like, I'm a human being just like you are, and we all can connect and relate. And, that's a powerful, powerful thing when you're trying to sort of tell a story. And that's what you're doing with this. So it's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, thank you. I feel so strongly about it with this. It's an interesting time, right? And it's easy to say like, kids these days, social media, all they're doing is they just want to like scroll through Snapchat or something, or TikTok, and their phones are out. So, so actually make the huge class a no electronics zone, and see if we can actually have moments in the room together. And some of my antics, like I shouldn't say this because if any of them hear this, they'll know, but I have all these pranks. I have a cell phone smashing prank. And there's like 6 actors in the room as part of it. And because the phone goes off and I get student volunteer to smash. And so it's a high drama. But it brings people into the moment of that event in the room, and we're all together. And I use that as a talking point a week later when I fess up. Because a student comes in the room demanding money and is going to smash my laptop, demands for my wallet, and pulls all this money out of my wallet, and I actually have hundreds of dollars in there, but it's fake Chinese $100 bills that I bought. So, but then it's like a moment to be together. It's like that moment in bands when we really stop thinking and agendaing, and we're listening, and something happens in a moment.
Yeah, and it's simultaneous, right? And we've all had that. And when it never stops being like magic, where you're playing something and you've never played it before, and then you suddenly all move to the same place at the same time somehow, and it's like you all have your antennas up or something, and it's like magic. It's great. Yeah.
So
cool.
Yeah, when I found out that you worked in geophysics, I mean, to me it just was like, oh, this makes so much sense. Immediately right away, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. And especially then when looking at your designs, especially like, for instance, your base behind you, you attribute to your mom. What's cool to me, just looking at it from some, my perspective, is just there's a shape to it that is accessible to people, where like it still looks like a base, and it's functional. It looks like it's well balanced, but like it has Fender. You immediately kind of speak. You think Fender, but it's like with geophysics, it's what's going on below the surface that is really what sets it apart. I mean, there's beautiful woodwork, and the woods are beautiful and all that, but I'm really curious about how you came up with what is going on underneath the surface, and what you can tell us about your design and all those chambers and how you're going about that. That's incredibly cool to me.
Well, thank you. I'm super honored to hear you say that. I'd love to talk about it. And it happened the first time I made a bass with somebody in mind. And it was for the wife of Robbie, this guy I work with, Norma. She's so amazing. When we have practices, she's super gracious and lays out this spread that can feed like, a band, like a big band with 30 people and horn players and everything. And there's like 3 or 4 of us. So I was like, Norma, and she has such a huge heart. I was like, I'm going to make her a bass because she's sort of a multi-instrumentalist and artist. And so I thought, I'm going to make small scale. I'm going to make it super organic. And as I was making it, I was sort of unconsciously being informed as I was thinking about her, that in some of the choices, because I was like, I know the shape I'm being drawn to for this Norma bass. It's like a Les Paul shape, but it's really rounded and hollow. And I'm going to do some inlays and stuff. And I love the idea of upcycling. So my brother gave me this pile of walnut steps from a construction job that ended up not being used. And they're laminated and just a random pile of 42-inch by 14-inch by 1-inch thick walnut steps. And I'm like, I'll use those because Norma's organic. And I started to be informed along the way. And that was my first experience of like, wow, even though I had a design in mind, a lot of the choices and target sounds and whatever were being, it evolved to be a piccolo bass. I was like, wow, because she plays like not a dulcimer, a zither, and maybe a dulcimer as well. So I was like, oh, she likes that higher range, even though she has a Fender Mustang bass. I was like, yeah, I'm gonna make it a piccolo bass. So then when this thing came along, I was like, yeah, I was gonna get a 6-string fretless from this amazing builder in Texas, Brady McElroy.
Oh, I know Brady. Brady's a great. I want Brady on this show at some point. Brady's a great guy. He makes cool stuff.
He's
great
awesome
player too. Great player.
Yeah, great player, and I've learned so much from his social media videos.
Yeah.
And so I sleuth a lot of people, and for sure he's one, and he's very gracious with his information. I was like, I can't swing it right now, price wise. So why don't I try making one? And then my mom, she was 87, little battle with cancer, and so I thought, okay, I'm gonna make one kind of informed by her. And so I started with the Yamaha Patitucci shape, the 6-string, and because I have one that a friend left with me to try to fix some dings in it. And I was like, I like that shape, and I like the neck, and I was really kind of smitten on the large string spacing. But then I kind of just went from there and just started pushing and pulling. The body was a little wide. I wanted it to be more feminine and super subtle inlays. And then the wood is from this guy locally, this guy Todd Langford at Chiquest Millworks. I found him on Craigslist right when he was just getting started. Super interesting guy, really gracious. I went over there with my Warmoth body of that jazz fit 5-string Warmoth body, which was a tank. It was super heavy. It was like bud. And the sustain was okay, but it was always kind of just like, it was 10.5 pounds. I'm like, can't do it anymore. I wanted to saw the thing in half. Like, here's the body, just literally resaw the body and then chamber it. And so I brought it over to him, and he's like, and he's got this big friggin' mill machine, right? He's looking at his mill machine. He's like, I think that's a little small. We could try it, but it might just explode or something, right? With this 1-inch bandsaw blades. So we started talking, and then we really hit it off. And then he had this willow acacia slab. He's like, here, you can have this. And I was shocked. I was stunned. I was like, why is this dude just giving me this $200, $300 slab of wood? Wow. And he's like, just do something beautiful with it. Awesome. And so I was like, yeah, it was so cool. It was one of these, I call it a Santa Cruz moment. I lived in Santa Cruz for a while where, someone would just like, when my wife and I first moved to Santa Cruz, we're on a side street, busy street. We're like, okay, some car just stops on their street with no stop sign, no stop light to let us in. I'm like, damn, people are like happy there. And,
This kindness and
yeah,
thinking about other people, it's amazing.
yeah. Well, so now I'm a customer for life with Todd. But anyway, so that slab, I was like, that's perfect for the mom base. And so I was really brought to this concept of organic because my mom was, Sicilian, Italian, mafioso descent. Her dad was a big mafia guy in Sicily. And but underneath that, she was this artist and super organic, cool, hippie, right on person beneath this complex, stylized, Fifth Avenue person. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try to like speak to her organic side, So I wanted it to be super organic. So the pickup cover and the knobs, I just made them all out of the same piece of wood. I wanted the neck to be really strong because I was starting to experiment with chambering. So this particular neck has 4 strips down it that are like saw curve strips that are separate from the 2 truss rods that I bought from you guys. And like on the picture on the lower right, with it's babinga and maple. There in the 2 outer maple strips, there is a very thin saw curve, and then in the 2 thicker babinga strips that surround the 3 middle strips, there are slightly deeper channels, and so there's 4 channels that go into the body, and then the 2 wings are also chambered. And there's that acacia slab that Todd gifted me. So
that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And at ASU, I'm super lucky. I took Wood 1 so I could maybe have access to the shop, and they have this amazing woodworking studio. So I'm shop monitor 1 night a week for the open shop hours, and so I have some of the other tools like a lathe to make the knobs.
Awesome.
And I wanted it to have a lot of tonal versatility. And so that's why I just talked to you guys, and you suggested the Aguilar. And it actually has more tonal versatility than I even use, which is perfect. So this bass is really pretty versatile. It's really, I could even, just to demonstrate like the continuity, not even plugged in, I'm sure you'll hear this. If I pluck the strings above the headstock, you'll hear it coming out of the F hole because there's continuity of the sound channels. And also I learned a lot from making this, that I didn't need to go so crazy with strength on the neck, because I was really paranoid about the channeling of the neck. Like, oh my God, what's going to happen to the neck? Because babinga on these scales of density, they'll be like something is 3 and 4 and maple's around 5, and babinga is like it's 17 or something. Like there's maybe
That's
one.
super strong. Yeah.
It's super strong, and so the bass came in a lot heavier than I wanted it. It's exactly 10 pounds. And I was hoping for 9. But I mean, 10 pounds, it's hard to get a 6-string.
Sure is.
The Patitucci bass is more than 10. So I'm okay with it. And I just put a wide strap on and it's okay. And
that's all you can do, really.
Yeah. So, but anyway, you brought up a good point. I'm drawn, and I was really influenced by Sadowski, some of his interviews, and just super gracious guy. Yeah. And every time I hear one of his interviews, it's like a layer. I hear a layer deeper about, like, one of his things that just blows my mind now is like, he's like, well, I like his interview on Michael Bashkin's podcast, which is another source of inspiration for me, the Luthier podcast, that Fretboard Journal one. Roger was like, well, I knew I had to be where the players are. And I was like, wow. So he's like, it's either New York or Nashville or LA, and New York was the only one that worked for me. So So, and that's really humbling. It like feels naked to make a bass and like give it to a player and just suffer their criticism. You know, that's like the negative like take on it, as opposed to like the players are teaching me how to make the right instrument.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to get the nerve up to do. Like I'm making 4 5 strings right now. They're kind of something between a jazz bass and a P bass body shape, but my little tweaks to it, I make it a little narrower. I try to make the curves a little more pronounced, but nothing crazy. Because Roger talked about this and I was really influenced. People are comfortable with their shapes. So
Agreed. Yeah.
you can do some wild shapes, and then there'll be a percentage of people who really appreciate that. Like you're pushing the envelope. I want one. But
Yeah.
if the business plan is to sell a lot of instruments, then you may want to think about well, what are people going to buy? And so okay, you got the Gibson and the Fender shapes, and you got the Rick. So I don't know. I was influenced by that. So I'm kind of like the idea of a sleeper car. Like, wow, you'd never know that El Camino with Granny original tires has like a double barrel, 357 under the hood, and they step on the gas and it blows away that Beamer. So I like that idea of a familiar aesthetic
Yeah.
that lets a player do whatever they want, because on the inside
Yeah.
it's super versatile.
Yeah.
That is it. I mean, it's that's the great thing about what you're doing. And the thing is funny that I think it's just great as we're sitting here, we ask about a bass and learn a whole lot about people, which just tells me how in tune and how much you're listening,
Yeah.
not just the players, but just the people in your life and how you're connected to them and how that's inspiring your work. I think that's incredible.
Yeah.
I think that's really incredible.
It really
Uh,
is.
Well, thank
but
you.
yeah, I mean that's really great. I mean,
Speaking of which, can I just interject here and just say how encouraging it was to get your note back in March, where because we'd never talked before. Actually, we haven't talked before this podcast.
yeah,
And we'd sent out like just everybody, like everybody else did in March. Everybody's like, gosh, like the world is ending, COVID, everything's shutting down. We don't know what's going to happen. There's such a massive amount of uncertainty around, is everybody's like, are we going to be able to employ everybody and keep everybody on staff? And like, are we going to be able to get product? And, so I wrote this email like at, I don't know, ridiculously early hour, one morning, the morning that I made the announcement to our own folks, and just said, hey, look, we don't know what's going to happen, but we do know a certain number of things, right? We know these 4 or 5 things. And I wrote, and I just put it in an email and sent it out to everybody else. Cause I feel like whenever I write that email, there is just a connection, because I always get responses back. I always get responses back from people. And in this one particularly, I was getting hundreds of responses from people just saying, hey guys, hang in there, just super encouraging. And one of the questions I asked in the email is like, what are you working on now? Right? Like, what's inspiring you right now in the middle of all of this? And you wrote back, right? And you wrote back, and you had just such a kind, kind of response. And it was super, super encouraging and motivating during that time. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you.
yeah.
I'm
So
not
we're talking about the human being aspect of everything, and that just,
Indeed, yeah, and yeah. Yeah, you're
Thank
always
you.
a gentleman, Ed. I mean, I've always enjoyed my interaction with you for sure. I mean, and that's one great thing about doing this on this side of things. I mean, I get to talk with bass players and builders, every day, and it doesn't really feel necessarily like a job, which like you had mentioned, that's awesome. I never thought in a million years I'd
yeah,
get to do this,
yeah, it's just
but
a ton of fun. Yeah.
and luckily, the negative interactions are an incredibly tiny percentage of what we do here. But you were on a pretty short list of folks that are just
Yeah.
always kind of
Yeah.
seemingly thinking of other people and very interested in
Yeah.
how other people are being affected by things. I think that's really great.
So Ed, when did this change? I don't know if if you'd even categorize it this way, but when did it change from building for, let's say, friends and family, for yourself, to like I'm just going to put the label on it and say a business. I don't know if you would, but how did that work? How did that come about?
Yeah, it's a great question. Quickly, I want to respond to the previous thing, that your gracious comments about my demeanor in communications. I think that's really good for the world to hear, because we're in this anonymous, like, flaming people in social media, where people aren't learning to talk to people as kindly anymore. And so I think it's important for folks to hear this message from you, that you actually receive what people send to you, and you guys are humans, and so there's a humanity layer of this that is happening. So that's awesome for me to hear, and so I really appreciate that.
Oh, you bet.
So Eric, your question's a good one, and I think when I started shifting towards, like, wow, I'm a seismologist, vibrations, wow, there's something in seismology called a waveguide, where the tectonic plates are moving around the surface, and when they dive into the center, like the ring of fire, which all the volcanoes, and the largest earthquakes on the planet happen where the tectonic plates are diving in. That plate and the crust on top of it act as a guide for the seismic energy. Like, the energy will get stuck and travel in it and travel around it. And I was like, oh my God, can the neck be a waveguide? And what is this relationship to a vibrating string with a body with channels on the inside? If those channels are tuned in length so that that string lights up the body for two things to happen. One is the goal is to, so the body supports that vibration, and so you can get more sustained. Or the body might light up with overtones and stuff. So if you're doing harmonics, or you're popping, or you want the crisp stuff, or hammering it with a pick, or the overtone series, because we never get just the fundamental, which then would be like a sub-synth bass. What would it be like to really light that up? Does it get in the way? So I started getting interested in that. And the other aspect of it is, you as a player feel it more on your body with that chunk of wood touching your belly, So I really wanted to explore that. And then so as I started getting into that and just playing with it, right now I'm still kind of in the trial and error mode. It occurred to me that, like, if this really does work, I could see this being a business plan, and I don't mind it being called that. Like, right now, I'm the weekend warrior, or evening kind of fun stuff, and that's a business model for a lot of us who do this. I have, like, a list of like 8 or 10 people who want, like, a ukulele. I mean, fretless banjo for a guy. I'm like, yeah, I totally want to. I'm into bending wood. I want to make a banjo. So, whatever. So I have clients, and there's a list of basses to make for these guys and stuff like that. So the end game, I think what shifted me is to have something that is unique that I'm exploring, that makes the bass like 2 pounds lighter and more resonant. I'm like, there's actually a market for people who don't want to. Oh God, I gigged last night, and I'm so yeah, and people who like beautiful stuff, resourced. I'm sorry, recycled, or I'm sleuthing Craigslist free daily for, like, oh, there's Granny's maple table. Like, I've got a neck on. Yeah, that thing back there is from. It's like a Craigslist maple table that I, like, laminated, and blah blah blah. So I think the business plan part of it is thinking about, like, when I start phasing out the day gig, which I love right now. It's hard for me to imagine stopping doing it because it's part of what makes me me, because it's sort of this weird thing. Like if I didn't do that, would I still be me? But to move towards having a shop and to do this full time and have a couple models and just to be able to do it and give instruments to people cost effective. I really like the idea of, for now, I'm still like exploring with innovating and experimenting. And so I charge hardly anything. I don't lose money. I shouldn't say this on the podcast. I don't want like a huge list of people like, you said your stuff is free. Damn it.
Well, that's always what's interesting to me too. Is just because ultimately, the materials cost what they cost, right? We can't do anything, but how much of a monetary value do you put on your time?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it comes down to. And I guess in your case, it depends, especially when you're still considering I don't think you ever really get out of the experimental phase. I mean, you may get to at least in my experience, if you're really on, if you're honest about it, but you're clearly you do get to a point where the craft is to a certain point, where you can feel comfortable saying that bit of it isn't necessarily experimental, but
that's a really good point.
But I guess if it's like more like a labor of love for you, or like it sounds like you're just as excited to be creating something to put in the hands of somebody that'll do something, again, make something beautiful with it. That is like kind of like its own payment, is what I'm kind of hearing from you, basically.
Right now, yes, because I'm super blessed with the day job where I'm not heinously affected by COVID. Because in fact, I teach from my room here, and over there you could see, well, there's my last geophysics lecture on this light board I built. I hang a black sheet behind me and light it up with LED.
In a way, it's really cool, right? I mean, it's just great that at least this happened at a time when technology at least can support this sort of thing. I think that's terrific, and the fact that we can do this even, is cool.
Yeah. So for now, I will, if it costs me using high-end pickups and preamp and hardware, or just hardware, I think is like the hip shot stuff. You can't go wrong with it. Whatever. So I just get that stuff from you guys. I pass that cost along to the customer with the cost of the woods and the finishes and the sandpaper. I try to include everything. So I'm really supporting I look at it as like slow motion Roberto Venn School of Luthery. Like I would be way more efficient for me to just take 6 weeks out of my life and just like spend the money and go there. And they have, but right now this is how I'm doing it. And as I get better at it, and I think like, my craft is really dialing in, I could start adding a percentage of stuff to now build up the wood stockpile, because I'm starting to develop a stockpile of book matched tops and backs, because the way I'm doing the bases now, there are these resonant chambers, and then there's a top and a back glued to it, so it's not like a solid piece of wood anymore for the body. And so I'm starting to build a pile of stuff. So if you want a bass from me, I was like, what do you want? Do you want this old school redwood? Do you want from this reclaimed stump in California, or check out this spalted or quilted maple that from a tree that fell down in Oregon? That kind of stuff. So
which you really have to do if you see yourself doing this in any sort of great kind of quantity down the road, because ultimately, as you know, and other builders will know, like old wood is stable wood, and you gotta, especially if you have it cut the size and you let it kind of sit around, you know pretty much what's going to do after 2, 3, 4, 5, 20 years. It is what it is. So that's really terrific.
What's fascinating to me, Ed, is like you're thinking about it as a business, right? And you're saying, I talk to so many people where, they get really comfortable with their craft and sort of like what they, what they're what they're known for, perhaps, and they sort of approach it, as a one-off each and every time. And they're not thinking sort of at the next step. They're not thinking about it as a business, right? There's a plan involved. There's some planning that goes into it. There's, some like, who is my customer and what do they want, and how can I best serve them? And, there's a marketing, even marketing, around that. It's really just trying to create a sort of a process in place that allows you to be able to do what you love to do, right? Which is build and make things. And that's interesting to me, right? I mean, I talk to a lot of people and they don't have that kind of foresight. It's just like project to project to project, and there's not any plan or a pathway to achieving a goal, right? Like a longer term goal. And sometimes that's fine. Sometimes, if it is a weekend thing and it's just something where they just love to do it and they're doing it for friends and family, that's one thing. But if you ever want to actually, make, any money from it and, allow it to be able to support in part or in whole, you or your family, right? There's some steps sort of you have to take to be able to get there. So I love how you're talking about that. That's very cool.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, part of it is, the day gig. As a professor doing science, we have to write research grants to National Science Foundation or NASA to get funding to fund our PhD students, because the PhD students are paid. So you're always thinking out, and so that's kind of a gift of the day gig. But also, I think like, okay, I could retire in 10 years. Actually, I could retire in 7 years, I think, on the books, or 15 years. But thinking about like over a 10-year period, my bass making getting better in more jigs and templates, so it's easier. So I just like, oh, Frankie wants a body with pickup poles this big, and he's going to do it right. Zip, zip, zip. I could do it in a couple of weeks instead of like my now and then, and it might take 9 months if I like get depressed because of COVID and I'm just like slugging through life. But I'm getting better and faster at that stuff. And then when I retire, to have like an operation that it's pretty easy for me to make a lot of bases and have inventory. But so I tend to think about it that way, like building the hobby or the business in order to like when I step out of the day gig, which might be a gradual thing and not really fully retire, to be able to do it.
Well, I mean, you don't really strike me as someone who necessarily should retire, because honestly, what I'm hearing from you, especially going right back to the first thing we were talking about, where it was kind of like, am I a bass player, or how can I be a bass player and how can I be a scientist at the same time? It's not so much like that doesn't necessarily define you. I mean, you are who you are, and you're complex. You have many different things you like, and even though you're looking at this from a business perspective, because obviously we do have to eat, we do have to feed the people who depend on us and keep a roof over head. But it seems like your ultimate goal for that is to allow you to keep making bases because you enjoy doing that. So to me, it's like you enjoy that you enjoy your science gig. I mean, it's part of you, and you enjoy this, and it just seems like if you're doing what you like, there's really no retirement. Retirement almost sounds like death, in a sense, right?
And it's true. And like it took me a while to appreciate this funny thing that, when you're a teacher, you could start to think that you're a teacher. I bestow information to others, which is kind of baloney, because the art of teaching teaches the teacher, really, and almost like the art of making an instrument is teaching me how to make an instrument, even though I must know how to make an instrument if I'm making an instrument.
Yeah.
I think about the retirement thing, and it's not really retiring. Like I have this goal. I saw this, I don't know if it was, I don't know where I saw it. It was Fretboard Journal or something, but like this maker in New York who makes guitars. She had this 1 week long ukulele course for teen girls. So I think like, wow, wouldn't that be bomb to have a 1 week course where body woods and necks are kind of really assemblable for underrepresented groups,
Yeah.
anyone, or for teens in the fifth largest metropolis on the planet. I mean, in the US, sorry, Phoenix area, to just like to gear up, partner with Roberto Van, whatever, but to gear up, like, because this is like the home brew, do it yourself cottage industry time. So best bass gear could, get partnered into these kinds of things to like everyone could be making their own instrument now, like the Stu Mac guitar kit, whatever.
Yeah.
Like that would be really fun to take my, like, okay, I've been a teacher and I kind of understand to not like top down, like, no, we're all learners. So let's open it up to see. And even in the wood shop to see like what Wood One students do with their projects. You have these people, you're like, oh my God, they no wood crafting experience. And there are people doing silly little things. And there are people like mind blown, like this dude, it was amazing. He was in the wood program. He made like a 10-foot tall Moebius strip, the circle that folds once and then reconnects.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, what drives someone to do something like that, right? And he like couldn't even get it in his house. Like when he like left the shop out of the shop door, it's like, what do I even do with it? So I want to see that in like young people making instruments who have no box. They have no, I played a Fender bass when I was 15 and that like, I can't get that jazz bass out of my head. That one I shouldn't have let go of, they don't have that. So it'll be, so in that stuff teaches you, you're like, every day I'm in there, I'm just like mind blown. I'm in a box. Look at these artists like thinking outside the box. Yeah. And that's one thing that super inspired me. I want to partner with artists for doing tops, like, okay, tell you what, carve this top and I'll add $200 to the price tag and whatever, or like epoxy design things. I have a bunch of things I'm scheming. So I think there's a lot of fun to be had.
Oh, there's no doubt. No doubt.
I absolutely love your energy level. Like there's definitely no lack of ideas and things that you're sort of working on across multiple, sort of like disciplines. It's funny or not funny. It's interesting to me how it sort of all weaves together, right? Like one thing that you're working on informs the other thing, informs the other thing, informs the other thing, and it makes it a more sort of well-rounded, probably, project in the end, right? Is because it's just, there's so many layers deep. I'm fascinated. This is amazing.
Well, thank you. I mean, part of it is like, I guess I feel a little bit like, I mean, this is not totally correct, but a little bit like a fake. Like there are the real builders, who have been doing it and are full timing and just getting by and working their butts off all day long. And then there's me. I have the luxury of this really great day gig, paid to be curious and research and study the inside of the earth. And you can go check out my TED talk and blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to make some guitars on the side. And so, part of it is like I'm trying to pull in all these resources because I don't think I know how to do it.
Which I don't. I mean, to me, especially, I have friends who went to Roberto Van. In fact, Max, who helped you with the preamp, like Max is really the one who very much taught me how to do this, like formally. And the thing that Max kind of bestowed on me, and the thing I realized is like there's more than one way to do everything. And even just you're milling your fingerboard. I mean, you could start with like everything square, and then work from there, or you can cut the taper first, and there's just so many ways just to approach when you start thinking of it from a manufacturing sort of perspective, like what should come before this thing and that thing, more efficient, right? But there's no wrong way. It's what works for you, and obviously you're a smart, curious guy, and I think there's there's resources and you know where to find them, that I think you're, just because you have been figuring it out slowly, piece by piece, I think that's a great way to learn it. So don't sell yourself short. I mean, I think you're being
Yeah.
super humble.
I couldn't agree more. I think the other thing too is they, that's what I find fascinating about doing these podcasts, is because you hear different perspectives across, different backgrounds of people that are bringing something unique, to the table. And, I think if any of them were on today, they would encourage you to do the same thing. Just keep doing what you're doing, keep being you, and bring your own flavor, to the table. Cause that's what's that and that story is what, is fascinating, I think, to people, and what makes it unique.
Yeah, and I think, that thing we talked about earlier about there's always something beyond my what I've done, and in my relationship to that thing that I haven't done because I think it might be too hard, is something that shows up in my day job with my mentoring my own PhD students. And one thing I really emphasize to them is that this concept of things you may unconsciously or consciously have stored that you're not good at. Oh, I suck at computer programming, or like, I've never really been good at,
Said you are,
matrix algebra or whatever it is. The wave equation. To understand that these 5 years of getting your PhD is actually, there's a lot. You're going to be in a relationship with loosening the grip of the reins of what you've come to adopt to believe you're not good at. And so since I'm doing that every day, I have that relationship myself. And so going to grad school and getting a PhD is a gift of like confronting that. And so it's the base making for me is I'm in a relationship with that, of like, if I'm thinking I'm not good at it, then I screw it up more times in a row before I get it right, as opposed to,
no question about
it's
that.
just, there's a recipe, and pay attention and don't think you're not good at it. It's just rather like, this is something I haven't done, and maybe I'm bringing to the table some some views of what I am or am not good at. And even the things that you think you're good at, I have to loosen the reins of that as well, because that's like thinking you're good at something. Yeah, I can lay down that. And you go with a bunch of guys, it's like playing tennis with someone who's better than you. Smack. Yeah. It's like the ego is as damning as the insecurity in science or base making. Yeah.
Well,
In life.
In life.
No doubt about
life.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So
That's awesome. Cool. So there's like, we just have maybe a couple of minutes left. Honestly, I think we could probably go for another hour, but
if not more.
Yeah, right. And so
I've got so many more things I want to ask.
I know. We need to do like a part 2 to this podcast or something where we come back on.
We'd love to have you back, Ed, whenever you want, honestly.
Absolutely.
how about tonight at 3 a.m?
Yeah, that's right. I was just going to say, Friday at 3 a.m.
That's right.
What else you going to do in these times, right?
That's right.
So
5 a.m. is good. Imagine 3 a.m. I mean, right? I mean, where will our brains be then?
Yeah. So I had maybe one final question for you, and then in all seriousness, we probably do need to do a follow up to this. But there's a lot you talk about insecurities, and you talk about people that just have challenges around sort of getting over the hump, right? And where you see the most success from people in their craft, it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's base building or something else, is they usually have somebody that's right next to them, right? Or just somebody that's behind them saying, you can do this, like, this is amazing. And there's this encouragement factor that somebody's bringing to the table. Who's that for you?
That's an amazing question. I guess it's there's different levels. Pragmatically, it's the people who buy my instruments and play them. Like, I have this guy who just bought this Mediterranean olive bass, from me from a tree in the valley with a really rich story where this branch was brought over from Jerusalem in the 60s and grafted onto a tree here, grows up to be a tree, falls down because, you know, this is like the Sonoran Desert and you got growing a Mediterranean olive tree. But 60 years later, you get this board out of it and it quickly warps. So I have to like find stuff to make a bass out of. This guy gets it. And this guy's been playing bass for 40 years. He bought a Sadowski 2 years ago that is the nicest sounding Sadowski I've ever played. And I have 3 that, you know, 4 and 5 and fretted, fretless. And I'm just like, it's a home run bass, right? And so I'm kind of like sheepish, like, Sadowski that's like, somehow Roger keeps making better basses, his team, you know? And so I send this thing to him and he's kind of blown away. And so he's sending me pictures, he's sending me MP3s of his band's recording. And it actually, I'm like, whoa, that thing has that low end that I dream I want to hear, that you feel, where it's the low spectrum is warm and present and fills the space without like that wonky dominating low thing. I'm like, that's that bass I made. It sounds better than it sounded here. So to me, that's kind of that like approval thing, because really I want people to be stoked when they play it, and I want to be stoked. So that's the pragmatic thing. Like there's always, for me, the inner critic is John Reuter, because he's so amazing. He's like, I was asking him about like the battery box on the back of my War Myth. It just, like battery boxes, I'm not a big fan of. Like you got this beautiful bass and you turn around and there's a black rectangle. So I'm like, I was like, what do you think about me? Like, can you find some swamp ash that matches this? And he just looked at me. He's like, that's on the back of the bass. Who cares? And so John has always said stuff like that. That's just so practical. And so I always think of John, like, what would John say? So there's that, you know, that's my inner critic, John, because he's like top of his game. But then really it's me. It's like, what's my own inner critic? Like, am I just like super excited about this because my vector is pointing towards beautiful woods, organic sustainability, something that resonates so you feel it in your body and you can get any, you know, sonic versatility, and that's like the electronics, and then lightweight. If I'm moving towards marrying those things, I'm psyched. Okay, maybe there's like, oh God, I'm getting good at hiding my mistakes, like the aesthetic mistakes, like, oh crap, I should be careful not to bump that thing before I finish it. And but so those things are getting better too, as I'm like, you know, your mistakes are you fail your way to success, someone says. So to me, that those people around me, like the professors in the woodshop program, oh my God, they can make anything, and it's still art, right? Like they taught and are teaching me that no, you're not a woodworker, you're an artist. I'm like, whoa, you that was like, oh, so that's just a medium. And so I started thinking about other mediums or whatever. So there's just, I think there's always people around me, if I'm open-minded, that hold that role. But on the philosophical level, ultimately it's me, you know?
That's awesome. Well, Ed, like I said, I mean, I think we could go on for probably at least another hour or so, but you know, I think we're going to cut it here. And I just wanted to say thank you. I think on behalf of myself and Frankie, I mean, we've been super excited about doing this podcast for a week and a half now, 2 weeks leading up to it. So it's super exciting that you were able finally to join us, and we were able to see each other face to face and talk. So just putting faces with names is one of the things that I enjoy the most about doing these things. So this is amazing. So thanks for spending the time with us this morning, early.
Oh yeah, and I'm super grateful, and I think best bass gear as you know, you guys have kind of been part of my journey, having a bass oriented outfit to kind of enable, encourage, inspire. Their base of the week emails, it's sort of it's not just a good marketing thing for you guys to like get more people to uh, seek you as a vendor. It's inspiring. That's kind of been part of it. So I'm
Yeah.
super grateful for what you guys do, and I'm just totally digging this journey. So thank you for having me.
Awesome.
Oh, it's our pleasure. And
Yeah.
honestly, from my perspective, I love seeing where these parts go and what it becomes. You know, that to me is the most incredible thing. Where you just wonder what's this going to be. So I'm always
Yeah.
encouraging people, like, please send me pictures of this when you're done. You know, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, but just to
Awesome.
see what you're doing, I mean, it is an art and a science, right? When you're because
is.
it has to be functional, and it has to like stay together. And I think you're really marrying those things, and I feel like that what you have going on inside of the base really lends itself to making it look however you want it to look,
Yeah.
because in terms of what you have come up with, your own unique special sauce with what's going on inside of it, I think it could translate to whatever you want to make it, you know. And you're right, you are your own worst critic, but you know, you don't get that element of surprise you get when hear somebody else play something, you see what somebody else has done, you know.
Mhm.
But we can see your, I mean, it's incredible. And I think boy, be proud, you know, for sure.